Welcome back to Tech Talk, sponsored by Tyro. This next session is all about the bond between design and chef. Interesting conversations to be had. Glenn will be moderating. Glenn, who's highly regarded in the hospitality and leadership industry and a passion for seeing people thrive, will be moderating the conversation today between Andrew and Stephen in around the design of a restaurant kitchen. Over to you guys.
Beautiful. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. We go all right. We're online there. Okay, how we going there, guys? All good? Yeah, no, a round of applause to start us in. That's what it's all about, right? They're here for you, Andrew, Stephen. Excellent. So I've got a few notes to keep myself on track. I have a tendency to roll off every now and again, so I want to make sure we do the right thing. But, you know, what are we exploring here today? The friction between kitchen design and function. All right, one of those big things. So in terms of, you know, how organised are you in advance to make sure you've got the right workflows in place so you don't hemorrhage in the long term in terms of operations. So two different perspectives sharing today. So first of all, I'm going to introduce a dear friend of mine, Dr. Andrew. Can I say that?
Doctor.
Andrew Brain. Andrew Brain is the past chair of the Asia Pacific Division of FCSI and also the director of Foodservice Consultants Society International. Sorry, Foodservice Consultants Australia.
Yeah.
Just going to calibrate my brain and get it right. So he's an expert in kitchen design. I've had the pleasure of working with Andrew on a number of different projects, and he's got a very curious mind about why you're doing, what are the outcomes, what is the path of least resistance to make something happen. He works tirelessly to bring hospitality operations to life, ensuring that they've got the firepower, the organisation and the services in place to deliver, ultimately, customer success. Andrew, great to have you on the panel.
Thanks very much, Glenn.
I like the doctor side of things. I'm going to roll with that.
I've never been called doctor before.
You could be.
I want to see those credentials.
That's a needs-to-know basis. And to my direct left here, Stephen Nairn. Stephen is the culinary director of LK Hospitality right here in Melbourne. He's got a team of over 120 staff and run high-end dining outlets, including the two-hatted Omnia Bistro and Yugen Dining, as well as a production kitchen, event spaces as well. He started his cooking journey in Scotland and has gone on to work in some of the hottest kitchens in the world. We're talking 11 Madison Park, Vue de Monde here in Melbourne, Cutler & Co. and Estelle by Scott Pickett. So quite the CV, chef. You must be pretty resilient. There's some pretty tough kitchens to roll through.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely been in the trenches, but came out on the other side.
Absolutely. So two different perspectives. We've got the chef and the operator now in the culinary director, and then we've got the design aspect. So question for you, Andrew, how important is that relationship, the chef and designer?
Yeah, it's interesting because in the early stages of a project, there might be an architect, interior designers, but maybe not necessarily a chef. And if there is a chef, we don't even know if they're going to be around when it comes time to actually start operations.
Yeah, and when you say that, so what sort of time frame are you talking when someone engages your services for kitchen design?
Yeah.
How far in front of the build process might they be?
It could be over 2 years. And so if we are introduced, we've had projects where we are introduced to a chef and they're the last person we want to listen to, because unless they're engaged, unless they've got a contribution and they're actually going to be part of the journey.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And Stephen, I guess from your perspective, when do you think is a good time for someone that's building a multi-million hotel, stadium, project, restaurant, whatever it may be? When should they engage someone to start thinking about the design process?
I think it's it's absolutely critical. It needs to be done in correlation with everything else. All aspects contribute to the final result, that the guest experience. So right from day dot, they need to at least be in the shadows or involved in some capacity, because if one comes in too late from another, they both need each other in terms of the architect, the designer, from schematic design to concept design. They need to be involved in some capacity, and then it can be tiered in terms of their involvement as they get closer. But 100%, if it's that sum of money that you're talking about, you need to, in my opinion, be engaging with a professional from day dot.
So is that a novel concept then? Because builders build and chefs cook, right? So if the two don't get together, what can happen then, say from a design point of view, if you don't engage anyone in a culinary sense until it's already built?
Well, we like to work with a representative from the kitchen. If it's a consultant like Stephen who can actually advise, it might not be his kitchen, but he might be the one who can influence the spatials, the way it's going to work, what the menu might be, or at least give the stakeholders an idea of what that should be, even if there's not necessarily a menu yet.
Yeah, and Stephen, so thinking about that at high level, so you've been on the tools yourself, you know what a high production kitchen needs to look like. So what learnings, what lessons have you taken that to now when you're consulting on bigger projects and probably some years in advance? What are some of those key questions that you're challenging the designers on?
So I think the most important thing to get a sound understanding of is like what are the expectations of whoever's putting the money down, the key stakeholder, what are their actual expectations? Then you're taking that vision, marrying it with the architect, the designer, to make sure that everything's in sync. And then once you as the consultant who's going to outlay the plan, bring it to life, inject the passion, the creativity and the DNA into it, you then need someone like Andrew then to make sure that the products that are being presented can actually execute the task at hand and marry with the owner or the operator's expectations. But, you know, is this actually going to work? That's the very, that's where you sit, is to sit in between, understanding maybe this is a bit overambitious and the owner can't see the full picture, but they're not a million miles away. I can tidy that up and bring it in. And then I can then go, okay, this is the absolute bare minimum that is required to do this. And then engage someone like Andrew who can then go, these are your options.
Yeah, is it realistic?
Is it realistic? Which is often a difficult marriage, because not everyone has worn all the hats. And I've done things from startups to going in to try and fix a problem where it's maybe they've spent an outrageous sum of money and they maybe think that the personnel is the problem, but sometimes it can be a really poor design, or it's only working for one party. Now maybe that's, you know, from a front of house perspective, maybe it's an aesthetic perspective, but often or not, it's very rarely is it coming from the back of house perspective.
It looked really interesting. There's a lot of moving parts in there. So who sitting here has ever taken over a hospitality operation or a restaurant or something like that you've not built? Just quick show of hands. You've had to run facilities that you haven't built yourself? Yeah, so quite a few of us, right? Quite a few of us. There's not always that luxury to be involved in that build process to bring it to life. So you mentioned there about retrofitting. Andrew, from a design point of view, what does that conversation look like?
Yeah, it's like, well, what are the expectations? Are they realistic? Is it actually going to meet the ability of the space? If the intention is we're going to take over a 50, 60 square metre space that's an existing kitchen and then try and deliver 180 a la carte meals, is it possible? Or do we have to bring the operator owner's expectations down or tailor the menu to suit the volume? And then it comes back to, is that going to be a viable budget to actually have enough staff in the kitchen, enough staff on the floor to address all of the people who we actually need to serve in that space?
Yeah,
the kitchen can be condensed. You can have all of this high-powered equipment.
And I think you said the magic word there, if it's in the budget.
If it's in the budget.
All right, if it's in the budget. And that's the million-dollar question. So in terms of not investing in a consultant, you know, Stephen, where have you seen things gone wrong? Clearly you've worked in some kitchens that maybe haven't worked well and you've had to retrofit. So is it more costly to not get someone in to advance, in advance?
I think it depends on the scale of the restaurant. If you're talking a neighborhood cafe, and usually they're not dealing with the same challenge because there'll be an owner operator operating at a certain price point, going to do a certain amount of revenue, and it's all within their same realms. They can manage it themselves. Their service period is short. It's finishes at 3:00, starts at 7:00. Very, very different so in that instance, to answer your question, I would say no, it's not required. But when you start getting into the serious realms, like whether it's lots of money being invested, ambitious projects, statement pieces, things that are like hotels, and then it's 100% necessary.
Yeah, and look, a really interesting viewpoint. And so we're just chatting at a high level about how that relationship works. Andrew, more specific question for you. When you connected and said, hey, let's get one of my previous clients on to have a chat, why did you invite Stephen along? What's some of the detail of the projects that you guys have worked on?
Stephen and I have worked on a few projects, and they've had their challenges, and we don't necessarily see eye to eye all the time, but if we're going to challenge each other, we resolve what is possible. So if Stephen's he's got a kitchen, a production kitchen that has a chocolate space, he has a production space that's all outside of the actual front of house. Now, there's a lot of things and a lot of moving parts, but that space, if anything, kept shrinking. His expectations don't shrink, his expectations get higher. And so when we're actually looking at what we need to do, even if it's that's a new build, but whether it's an existing facility, it's marrying the difference between the chef's expectations and what we're capable of delivering. And in Stephen's case, he would make all the demands and give his expectations. For us and our team, it was trying to convey that through to the architects and the people who are giving us the space. And they say, you can use all of this, but you can't put your exhaust there. Why? Because there's some obstruction in the ceiling. Then you can do all of this, but you can't put your warewashing over this side because we can't get penetrations. And Stephen's like, it only makes sense to put it there. And I want my cooking there.
So Andrew, you're saying a lot of what you do then is understanding what the chef or the operational considerations are.
Converting.
Converting it into that design plan, that architect build. It's like, services, power, how it's all going to clip together, plumbing, all needs to be considered, right? Because the building's going to go up either way. Yeah.
And Stephen just wants to walk in and have his staff produce the food, but not have to compromise on the flow and functionality of that space.
And so, Stephen, as Andrew's alluding to the project you guys worked on, so you just want to give us a bit more detail on that. So how long ago was the planning? How long has it been open for? Just give us a bit of a high level.
So the project that Andrew's talking about is where I'm existing. At that time, I was brought on really to just bring everything alive. So that was in 2018. And then we never actually moved into the place until 2019. And that is a large venue inside Capital Grand, which is in South Yarra, and there's Omnia, there's Yugen Tea Bar and Patisserie, there's Nidami, there's Yugen Omakazi, there's 2 event spaces, and we have some other things that we do as well. So it was a very and the timeline for the project. I now am a partner in this business and the CEO of the company. But at that time, I was just the culinary director and really to bring the restaurants alive. But I think it was a very ambitious project. They were originally going to open 3 restaurants in 18 months, which even by high-end hotel standards, that's quite aggressive.
And there's a massive retail on top of that precinct
there's
as well?
There's luxury retail, but mainly it's luxury residential apartments.
Yeah, okay, so
which we also service.
Of course, so it sounds like there's a lot of moving parts there. So from a chef point of view, how did you train yourself to then move beyond sort of being in a kitchen and making it work to then come back and look at it, plans on paper and start to sketch it out and ask the right questions? Yeah,
I think that's a good question. I was quite fortunate that I was a head chef of a 3-hat restaurant when I was 24, 25. So then by the time I would, the kind of day-to-day opportunities or problems, you kind of, after a few years, have moved to, maybe to oversee larger problems, which are things like structural design, workflow, these kind of things. And then it just comes naturally. But you need to do a lot of personal development, and I've got a keen interest in design. So I'm always looking for things like these kind of things that maybe will provide efficiencies. Not some, there's a lot of stuff out there that's not very relevant, looks cool, but has no place in a restaurant. But there's other things. So I've got a passion to try and find those those kind of things. So I think it's a bit of self-development and ambition.
Yeah, self-development, absolutely, for sure. It's not an easy skill to start to conceive what it looks like on paper and then translate it into the physical space. But where it goes wrong, I mean, if it's not done well, can that be expensive from a labour point of view?
Yeah, absolutely. That's probably the most, pressing issue in ambitious restaurants now, is that if there's not wins on labour in terms of efficiency, like an easy one to look at is like gas stoves over induction. To clean a gas range after 100 covers is 45 minutes to do it properly, and that's pushing. You won't find people that want to clean a gas stove in 45 minutes. I'm talking an 8-burner, as opposed to deep clean a 6-zone induction is 10 minutes. That's 7 days a week, especially on penalty rates.
Adds up, right?
It makes an enormous amount of money. Plus, those kind of efficiencies are like critical in the modern era of restaurants.
Yeah, look, when everyone's screaming for labour, and one of the countless conversations I've had over the last couple of days with the trade show is around labour. Where's my next body coming from? How's that going to look? So thinking about that in the design phase, that sounds really interesting. Andrew, workflow. Yeah. What does that mean for you?
Yeah, we realise that when it comes to what needs to be prepared within the space, if you make it too tight, if you don't give staff enough space to move around or bend over and reach down, then you've got one staff member hitting into another staff member, causing friction. They're not necessarily going to stay at that place for very long. So we want to try and optimise the space. And you can look at a plan and say, here's all of the work zones, here's the wash zones, the sinks and the cooking. And you can completely ignore the fact that you've got this space in between. And you could go to an absolute minimum and say, we'll get away with a metre between a cooking space and a prep space. But that's only for one person. So if one person's got the capability of moving through that space, you're limiting it to stopping anybody else from using that, and the flexibility goes down. As soon as you get to closer to 1.2, 1.4, now you've got more space, more people, and you're not actually forcing the chef to take 2 steps. They can just turn around, still reach and grab and work in that environment. You don't have that clash, walking behind, elbows in the backs.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of planning, a lot of consideration to really think about that long-term outcome.
Human element.
How busy? How busy we're going to be? Because if you've got, say, it's just 2 staff members on the floor, then they're not really going to need a big wide area to go to and fro. But if you've got 30 staff pumping in and out, you want to make sure that they're not smacking into each other or clip of elbows, drop of plate. That's costly as well. Stephen, are they some things that you think through when you're starting to map it out?
Yeah, 100%. I think I always look at things in two ways in management. There's like attacking, and then there's defensive. So like everyone, when they open a restaurant, they think it's going to be doing 180 covers every single night. It'll be max. This is going to go on forever. It's just never the reality. It has ebbs and flows. So in terms of the design, you still need to be able to deliver the product that you're saying that you're selling. Why people have came to your restaurant, because they love what you do. But although you need to be able to scale up, you also need to be able to still execute with a small number of staff on those quieter days. That's something that's often overlooked. So if you don't design things in that manner, there's wins within each pocket of the hotline, as we would say, then you can end up in a format which is very, very common in ultra high-end fine dining restaurants, where you'll have people like me that will say, well, the minimum buy-in is 13 chefs and 15 front of house. Now, in the modern era, you do need to think. Again, it depends on what you're operating, what you're trying to do. But absolutely, when it comes to mapping it out, if the cool room is downstairs or it's outside, you'll often hear someone saying, it doesn't really matter. That 100% matters. All these things, we're always absolutely, to answer your question, always thinking about, always considered at the planning and design stage.
If you can operate on 2 staff on the quieter days or the quieter periods of the afternoon, and then throw in 3 or 4 more and at the service point or back of house and cooking, the more you're actually making the space flexible. And if you've got a show kitchen, you might be able to do some of those front of house elements with 2 chefs and maybe one service point, because you might only have 6 people in the restaurant. You're not going to employ a full crew.
Yeah, so that ability to scale or to pivot, to scale up, scale down, try a few different things, really important. So question for you, Chef. Surely all the money should be spent front of house, customer facing, right? The sexy, the bars, the lighting and all that. So chefs can just get by out the back, surely.
No, it's definitely not the case. And again,
That's not what you said in rehearsal.
no, I would not get in. I would not entertain a project where that mentality was there. That's not going to work. Restaurants an ecosystem. You need to have equal appreciation for every single aspect. All the guest touch points and guest experience things are absolutely critical. But it's just like a car. The kitchen is the engine, and the kitchen is going to take the biggest amount of beating. The kitchen's going to get absolutely smashed. The kitchen's never going to stop. Everything's going to run all day, 7 days a week. There's very, very little rest periods for that machinery, those surfaces. They're high impact areas. I don't agree with that.
It's using more energy than any other part of the restaurant
100%.
as well. More water, more power, more gas.
Yeah, but everything within moderation. But no, I think the days of, just slap it up out front and then, the slaves in the back will just crank it out. I think those days are gone, thank God.
Yeah, no, look, fair enough. And just as you were saying that, I was thinking about, I was at IKEA not long ago just for a wander through, and they have the signature chair that they've got that little robot testing it, sat now 12,000 seats, 13,000, the number just keeps going up. So in terms of equipment, you said there, it's going to cop an absolute flogging, the engine room. So how do you then approach equipment? What sort of things do you consider about how is it going to go the long term?
I think the best piece of advice I can give anyone in dealing with representatives of equipment is never forget their salesman or saleswoman. They're selling a product. So as nice as they are, as approachable as they are, as well informed they are about their product, they are selling you their product. So it's on you as an individual, or certainly if I'm acting on behalf of someone, I'm going to do my research. Now, I love Dr. Brain here, but just because he's telling me that my Brasa stove burns fuel 50% less than something else, I will go and check that. I will test it out. I'll always say, and the other thing with equipment that I'll always look into is the warranties. There's a fair few companies here that I've dealt with in the past, and amazing up front, but when you need them, maintenance, equipment, horrendous. Customer service, super poor. And there's other brands that absolutely excel in that, and they're the ones that whenever something needs replaced, or if we're doing a consultancy for someone else, I'm always recommending them, because the customer service aspect is super important in choosing equipment.
And that drop in efficiency, let's just say, I don't know, an oven goes down, and that's great. Oh, the part's got to come from overseas. It'll be here in 3 weeks. How's that translate for the customer?
It's basically affected. Everything is hitting the bottom line. So if you're not budgeting for a $1,500 Unox or Rationale replacement piece every week, just or call out fees left, right, and centre. So ultimately, it comes down to what you can offer your guests, because maybe the florals are going to need to be given a miss. Maybe the entertainment's not coming that week because it does all hit. You can factor in a reasonable amount of servicing or preventative maintenance or things like that. But if you're being recommended a piece of equipment, and purely because maybe it's advantageous for whoever's suggesting this piece of equipment, and you're left holding the baby with breakdowns, it has a massive effect on your team, most importantly, and also the guests.
Yeah, especially in the long term. Andrew, does that, from a design point of view and an independent consultant, does that put you sometimes in a situation? Are you out there pushing brands or how does that work in your world?
Yeah, we are. We tend to look at the durability of the actual appliance that's fit for purpose. But one of the things we like to challenge the suppliers with is to say, you might have a standard 12-month parts and labour warranty, but we want to push that to 5 years. And have preventative maintenance. Now, a lot of the manufacturers will say, we don't do that. But our client is going to benefit from that. And it's just a simple case of, okay, factor in what you know are those failure points. Factor in if you're saying this machine can operate 20 hours a day, and Stephen's pushing it to the point where it is operating at 20 hours a day, something breaks, falls off, or something happens, and then they say, okay, well, it was only ever supposed to be working maybe 6 hours a day. It's like, but you sold it to me on this premise. Now, he hasn't really pushed it harder than what he said he was going to do. They should be able to cover the warranty or up-spec their own product to make it cater for it. So its durability and it's the duty of the actual appliance goes up, but also with the level of service, everything should be covered in that 5-year warranty. And if it's coming back through the kitchen contractor who has supplied it, through the manufacturer and the suppliers, then they should be able to say, okay, we've got a tech service team, and we're going to actually cover the warranty of all of that for the period of those 5 years, parts and labour.
Yeah. So they sound like, Stephen, some really important conversations to be having up front in terms of this equipment, but what's the warranty look like? And when you're challenging Andrew in that way, what kind of questions were you asking him about the repairs and maintenance? Like, what's your thought processes about factoring that in?
Well, it's just like that's just any other form of money management. If you were buying a house, you'd have a building and pest inspection done thoroughly, and you would investigate everything. So I'm looking at all these kind of things. What's your past experience with it? Where do you recommend I go and look at it? And over a period of time, if you're working with someone like Andrew, they're not going to be sending me to somewhere that's not of the, doing the same kind of product, so I can go then and speak to their key people and say, hey, what's your experience with this product? And if they say, hey, it's bullshit, I won't go with it. Or if they're saying, hey, it's fantastic, then I'll
reliable.
give it. Yeah, but again, I don't. It's it's not solely on one person. You need to have confidence in your own ability. When you look back to your own experience, like if you've worked in proper restaurants, there's nothing more annoying than the maintenance guy in at lunch service when you try to do 80 covers. The guy, you're working with one stove and it's like a 1 or 2 star Michelin restaurant. Absolutely infuriating. So you have to do your own research. You have to take Andrew's opinion on things, but then you got to go and say, like, hey, is this correct?
But our reputation relies on that as well. If we don't do our research and we don't actually go in to trade shows like this, and if we don't kick the panels and try and break the doors, put it through its paces, it's great when it's on a stand and it's nice and shiny, it's a brand new piece of equipment. But if I'm looking at it and pulling it apart, or if I go to the factory and then I'm seeing how it's been manufactured, a lot of people will say, okay, well, consultants get these trips all over the world, and you have the opportunity to go and see these wonderful places and wonderful countries. But if I'm actually in the factory where I see those appliances being made and see the effort and the frames and the durability of what's actually being put into it, and then the technology that goes behind it, I'm not the one who has to service it, but I'm seeing how that's being put together.
Yeah. And Andrew, a question for you. So how would you suggest to people here and those listening, how would you suggest they get the best out of working with a design consultant?
I'd say to start with, we need a very clear brief. We need to know who the stakeholders are. We need to know who the decision makers are, and a budget, because you can have all of the want or wishes and ideals in the world, doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to achieve that. When it comes to what we need to deliver and how we need to design, we need to focus on what's the intention, what does the operation need, what is the space that we're looking at, and then actually start to divide the space up. And we could start with just a clear canvas. There is no dining room, there's not even a front door. There's not even a back door. There might be lift shafts. We might be on level 30 of a building. But that's all in the planning stages. So we need to determine what goes in under that floor and what we have access above that floor, and then circulate all of those elements throughout that building. If we don't know any of that and we just get told, here's a space that we want to put a restaurant in, It's not simply just a plan on a piece of paper.
Yeah, so you say that there's a big element of transparency required?
Well, we need to know. We need to know not just what the operation's going to be. We need to know what the physical constraints around that building are going to be.
Yeah. And Andrew, can you just talk on just for a moment there your involvement with the FCSI? Because I think for those of us here that haven't engaged with consultants, like what does that mean? What does that body represent? How does it maintain standards?
Yeah, the FCSI is a global association of independent food service consultants. We pride ourselves on the fact that we investigate the products, we recommend based on the client's needs, where we don't take commissions for any equipment sales, we don't sell equipment, and we recommend on the basis of what is fit for purpose. Whether that's a $200,000 restaurant or a $10 million kitchen in a convention centre. So it's independence and education.
No, and that's really helpful. And Stephen, so on that same line of thought there, in your experience, what have you found gives you the best result from working with a consultant?
I think it's troubleshooting. If the main problem that happens is along the design process is things change. Constantly things change. Things are discovered. And if the person doesn't, that you're working with doesn't have the same kind of pivot or problem solving skills as yourself, it's a problem. So the main thing that I get out of it is that shared desire to find a solution to a problem that's not just so obviously, and everyone else throughout the design process just has super simple solutions for extremely complex problems because they're only just looking at what they can see in front of them. They're not thinking like, how am I going to do this when that one's operating, doing 200 covers, I've got a lunch here, I've got this here, I'm servicing rooms here, how's the traffic flow working? They don't care because that's not their remit. So you need someone who's got experience and you can say, fuck, I've heard that we can't put live fuel in here anymore. Well, what are we going to do? Because that's pretty.
That's what the menu's made from.
That's our ambition. And you need someone that said, hey, I done this job in Singapore. This was a similar problem. Do you want me to set up a Zoom call? You can chat to him. This is what we put in. It wasn't ideal, but he's happy with it. Those kind of things where it's not like panic. It's pivot, and not just giving in to the easiest. Which is what kills the concept is when everyone just settles for the easy thing. I mean, that's just
things can become over the period or a journey of a project. Once you've been involved in something for 18 months or 2 years, it can wear you down. Oh, yeah. And then when you end up with people telling you, we've got to find a cheaper way to do this. We've got to find smaller products because the space has changed. We've got to maintain our level of commitment the same as when we first started. That was the same as the first day we walked onto that project. You can become complacent. Well, we like to think that we're going to stay and see that through and then keep raising the questions that we raised on day one. Don't ignore what we were talking about.
Yeah, so it sounds like the relationship then can turn into a longer term, right?
You've got to think of it that way.
And I think you said earlier that friction is not a bad thing. You want to be challenged as a consultant and say, well, this is what I think and what I believe based on my knowledge, but be challenged by the clients.
We don't have all the answers. But with engaging chefs that challenge us, is so much better than an architect or an interior designer just saying, just give us the space. Just tell us what we need to do.
And Stephen, you mentioned there about really putting yourself in the shoes of your chefs and your front of house staff and so forth. So thinking about, and one of the big things that keeps ripping on through the industry is about that long-term sustainability of staff and their overall wellness. What kind of things did you think about when you were setting up the back of house structure down at Chapel Street there to make sure that it was efficient for your back of house team?
Well, you've got all of the physical things that would impact the body, which are, before you get to any of the other kind of luxuries. That's things like flooring surfaces, drawer refrigeration. If you're bending down and having to go right into a fridge, 100 times a day, that has an impact on the spine. Then there's other things, just like
Vertical transport. You got
yeah,
long
vertical
lifts.
transport, absolutely. And then there's other things like, brat pans, stock boilers, thinking of like the action required to drain a 100-litre stock pot when it's on top of a stove versus a brat pan. Things like having proper trolleys with reinforced wheels, that are not just falling and you're in the middle of a banquet and, 200 plates are on the ground. You got this nonsense trolley that was just cost 100 quid as
Gives
opposed
everyone
to...
the shits.
Yeah, you get all of those things. So you're absolutely, you have to consider all of those things. But I think the biggest win is really designing the kitchen smartly and correctly, so that I always like to try and set things up so that I take out the reason for complaining or any excuses. So everything's there, everything's at hand, is very, very quick to execute and build upon. It's a comfortable space, it's enjoyable to work in, it's not hot, sweaty, and grubby and greasy, and things can't
Or
be
hard to
cleaned.
clean.
Yeah, that's a big thing. But ease of cleaning is, it's just like living in your house. You don't want to, you're not going to live in squalor. You clean your house. It's the same. A kitchen is so important that it's sanitary. Things work, because all of those. It's a very, very, very difficult job. And when you're living on nothing works and it's broken down, and there's things out of place, and unfactored benches that people whack their hips off of, and they're slipping, and there's injuries, and that all adds to the big flare up of when people are dropping tools and saying, I'm out of here, I've had it with this place, as opposed to, although the daily operation is difficult, but you're looking at it and you're like, this is a pretty beautiful space to work in.
If it feels good, I like coming to work. Maybe I'll be more productive. I'll enjoy it.
It goes back to those old philosophies of kitchens, and it's really all, again, coming back to that ecosystem. It's the respect for what your craft, the respect for what you're doing. It flows into the respect to suppliers and producers, products, ingredients. It's all within that same ecosystem. I'm a big believer. If people come in, they can sense that someone thought about this, someone really cared about. It has a different level of expectations working there, as opposed to when you come in, there's cardboard all over the place, there's shit on the floor, and that nothing works, and people won't have sense of pride.
Yeah,
but
big difference from, I guess, onboarding staff. Your team turn up, it feels good. I'm thinking I might be here for the long term, and that's really going to help with the overall product, isn't it?
Absolutely. You can't make a silk purse out of sow's ear. So you just have to. In this day and age, there's lots of options. There's so many restaurants in Melbourne, so many restaurants in Sydney, Brisbane. There's lots of opportunity for other people to work. If you think that they're not going to factor in the condition of the kitchen or the restaurant, you're absolutely dreaming.
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew, are there in your work in kitchen design, are there a few common challenges that you come up against? Like, is there a frequency of questions that come up and need to be considered?
Yeah, there's usually the challenge of the way we like to enter a room, have the deliveries come in, and then if we've got an architectural team that say you can't put the doorway there, or you can't put a service hatch here, or we want doors that swing in for traffic to go into the kitchen and swing out, and there's a certain configuration for that, and the architectural team don't necessarily understand it and don't include that in their documentation. So we're now currently doing a lot of 3D Revit, and then when they don't put the walls in out the positions that we would like them, we'll put those walls in, put those doors in, and then show in 3D how that is actually supposed to work, and it becomes logical then. And it's not until you actually see that, and sometimes you've got to go that far.
Yeah.
Often we're told, you're not the architect, you can't determine those things. But we have to take a certain amount of authority and say, it's not going to work if you don't do that.
And having that authority to deal with architects, if that was just, say, Stephen as a chef operator, would he get the same kind of cut through speaking to an architect builder?
He'll just be yelling to me behind the scenes, behind the meeting, going, why didn't you tell them? Like, you need to push them harder to actually get them to listen to you.
Yeah, you want to get your points across, and so that 3D modeling's been really beneficial for what you're working on now.
Yeah.
So just a question, and we're coming in our last couple of minutes here, around technology, right? We're here, we're talking tech. Tech is moving that fast, and we see it each trade show grow year on year. There's a bigger presence. So in terms of kitchen design, what are some things that need to be considered for the future?
Yeah, tech is one of those things where whatever we're saying we're doing now, we're already behind. And whether you're actually at a tech show, there is a couple of robotic cooking appliances here. They're touching on programming, and that's really good. There's ovens here that know what is on the tray before it goes in and then sets the programming. There's also dishwashers that can sense whether the dishwasher's got pots and pans or plates and adjusts the wash cycles to suit that. There's also robots that load dishwashers, unload dishwashers. There's mechanisation that's been in place for, 20 years, but now the smarts behind it in the Internet of Things and understanding and learning, whether it's chopping a tomato and then putting all of those produce into a storage place similar to a manufacturing plant that would know exactly where it put its steel and then be able to pull that out and then ready for the next job. So.
And with that tech coming through, Stephen, is that something that when you were considering the design plan, you were thinking was it like data points and so forth? Because even with the technology that Andrew's referring to, surely that's going to cop a workout. And if you get a program board smashed, that sounds expensive.
Data logging is a big part of that.
Yeah, there's all those kind of HACCP advantages, and I think in different sectors, probably not quite in mind, but things like aged care and hotel, I think all those things are, super critical. But I think we're in more in my kind of sector in the restaurant side of things, where you probably see more uses of technology will be things like regeneration of like maybe fryer oil. These kind of consumable costs are enormous, but I think there's already pretty significant breakthroughs with like things like UV lighting and infrared cleansing of oil. I think that's probably where we'll see technology more in the restaurants that are still super hands-on in terms of like the products being served is not something that's just like is a burger. It's maybe more of it's a tasting menu where there's a structure that maybe is a lot more fluid and changes. I think it'll be more in these kind of sustainability approaches that we'll see tech rise in the restaurant field.
So it really comes down to that overall objective from the kitchen operation, what's their output, who's their customer, and just back to basics 101 of business, knowing who your customer is.
Tech takes over the mundane task. The robotics takes over that, and then in programming, you can maintain consistency, whether that's with the dosing or the products that are actually being put into whatever the recipe is. If all of that is automated and the systems know how to collect each element, then that's where the tech is going.
Insightful, Andrew, insightful. Andrew, so last question for you, and the same for Stephen then. So if there were, say, a couple of top tips you'd like to share with the audience here about kitchen design, what's your top tips?
For design, it probably comes down to don't dream, be realistic. Simple. Don't be a dreamer.
Nice point, actually. Don't dream, be realistic. Yeah, so know your limitations, know where you're at. That transparency you spoke about earlier. Need to have all of the information so you can make an informed decision. Beautiful.
Yeah. And have a realistic budget. You can have the best product and a groundbreaking idea that's brand new. But if you don't have a realistic budget, the best ideas will never get off the ground.
Yeah, fair point. Thank you very much. And Stephen, from your perspective, top tips for kitchen design for those listening today?
I think two tips I would definitely give would be, one, don't be pressured into buying something you do not actually need. Maybe they're like, in time to come, you will need, you can always look at that in time. Make sure you've got the absolute bare essentials to deliver your food, or whoever, if it's a hotel, whatever you've been actually hired to achieve, make sure you've got all of that. And for me, the most important thing is never listen to anyone that's telling you that, this doesn't matter. If you hear that, red flag. It's everything matters. Absolutely.
What's
every
their
little
agenda?
detail. Sorry?
Understand their agenda.
Yeah, understand their agenda. Why are they saying it doesn't matter? If you've got 20 plus years at extreme, really high level, and you devoted your life to working in a particular ways, don't let someone manipulate you because maybe they're in a higher position or they have quite an intimidating presence or maybe they're outlaying the money. You are still going to have to deliver that product. Your food, your name, your reputation, your team. You're gonna be having sleepless nights. So if someone's saying, it doesn't matter that it's a 5-tray oven over a 10-tray oven, fuck, it matters. So you have to fight for it and fall on your sword because you're going to battle with it or without it.
Use your intelligence. Find a independent FCSI consultant, and then they will guide you to where you need to go.
Stephen, I love your attention to detail, your thought process of putting yourself in the chef's and the worker's shoes to really map it out. And Andrew, I think your points there around the 3D rendering to really visualise the space, really helpful. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together. Andrew Brain, Stephen Nairn.
And thank you, Glenn.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Well, there I am, very loud. Were there any last questions before we hand over today? No, great. Awesome insights and really great key takeaways at the end too, guys. Thank you so much for your time today, and thanks to all the attendees.